So you mentioned LinkedIn, and I think it's a great for us, when I looked at LinkedIn, I didn't look at it from the perspective of kind of the social angle. I basically had a massive Word document, right, where I basically took all of the roles, mapped them to regions in the world, mapped them to teams, if I could make the connection, understand globally where they're, currently. Now, okay, they're looking at kind of moving forward in terms of, hiring projections and what's on their website. And that actually gave me a bit of, a tool when I went in and said, okay, they're, A, much smaller, B, they don't have the manpower, the firepower to really help you in that specific region of the world. So we double down on certain regions.
Welcome to the Marketing Academy Podcast by GCMO, where in every episode we sit down with a marketing expert to deep dive into a hot topic shaping the industry. I'm Yitzi Tannenbaum. Let's get started.
Welcome back to the Marketing Academy Podcast by GCMO. I'm Yitzi Tannenbaum, and today I have my friend Asaf Regev here, who is the Director of Product Marketing at Pantera.
True that.
Thanks for having me. Let's move a little bit closer. So the topic today is super interesting in my opinion, and it is competitive analysis, competitive intelligence. So Asaf, tell me a little bit about what you do and how competitive analysis fits into your role.
Very good questions. First of all, thank you very much for having me. And yes, absolutely. So the way I see this, or the way it relates to how we do things at Pentera, there are four main pillars, if you will, to product marketing, with competitive intelligence, competitive analysis, whichever way you want to call it, is, in my opinion, the first, the most important, the kind of go-to. We can speak about the other ones, if you will, or if there's a desire, if there's a wish, but let's kind of focus on this one. And to me, it really helps to build the foundation of how we tell the story, how we go to market, how we go and launch new products, how we position ourselves internally, how we position ourselves, when we speak to analysts and so on and so forth. So it's very fundamental, very basic, but then everything kind of builds on top of it. At least that's how I see this.
Right. So it's a question I get a lot of, what does product marketing do? So maybe very, very briefly, tell me what the other three pillars are real quick.
Sure. Yeah. So we said the first one, competitive analysis, competitive intelligence. The second, analyst relations. When I speak to a lot of product marketers, and, shameless plug, we're looking for a product marketer. If you know one, if you know good ones, send them my way. So analyst relations, that's the second one. Go to market enablement, that's a big one. Typically doesn't really sit within, kind of traditionally within the product marketing, but in Pantera it is. And the fourth one is, product launches. So they all sort of tie in. And as I said, competitive is almost the foundation. It kind of sits across everything, because the way, as I said, the way you position it, the way you tell the story internally, externally, analysts, on your website, it all matters.
So let's get into it. When we look at competitive intel, talk to me about, what do you do? Where do you start? How that looks like? What do you take into consideration?
Okay. So I consider this a bit of an art, because you can't just look at it from a unidirectional kind of, okay, let's just look at their website. Let's just look at their LinkedIn. Let's just look at, it needs to be very broad in how you go about this. And as I told you, I listened to a podcast on the way by the former CEO of Recorded Future. And he basically said that when he moved into his new role in another company, he basically said, I want to get fired. That was his intention. I want to make everything automated. I want to bring in all those data sources, data feeds, data information points, bring it in and kind of have the AI or whatever kind of automation. He's using Zap here in his example. But he basically said, listen, I want to make myself redundant in a way. So that is not my wish. That is not, I don't officially want to get myself fired.
Right.
But I kind of see the appeal. So when initially in this role, but also in prior roles, I used tools, and we've spoken of some of those tools. I can name them by name. I mean, I've used, Crayon, I've used Clue briefly, varying level of success. And we've spoken about this, and you've told me a similar story. And I think it has to do with the industry. And I think that they may be very good in certain industries. I think that they can provide insights. They can provide valuable, actionable, freshly squeezed intel, whatever you want to call it, information. But I think that for the sake of the specific cybersecurity market, I think they were lacking. And I can't fault them in other ways, specifically as it relates to my role into what I anticipated, the expectations I had.
I agree. I don't think it's a problem with them. I think our industry is not built for a competitive intel tool, just because it's not that dynamic, right? Like things aren't changing. I mean, things are changing and it's extremely dynamic, but in not the same way as, I don't know, a fast food restaurant. Also, it's very technical. I think when we analyze a competitor, we want to know what their capabilities are, what they do, how they do it. Like a big thing that the tool does is it'll sit on the website and on social media and it'll collect like information about, but I don't care what they're posting on LinkedIn. I mean, I do, but that's not where like the real difference comes from.
So let me give you the backdrop. So you mentioned LinkedIn, and I think it's a great, for us, when I looked at LinkedIn, I didn't look at it from the perspective of kind of the social angle.
Mm-hmm.
I looked at it from, okay, how many active employees do they have,
Right.
in the, in each region, area, country. I scoured their website looking for open positions. I was even banned from LinkedIn at some point because I had looked at a specific company, looking at every role they had. I took it, I basically had a massive Word document,
Right.
where I basically took all of the roles, mapped them to regions in the world, mapped them to teams, if I could make the connection, understand globally where they're, currently. Now, okay, they're looking at kind of moving forward in terms of, hiring projections and what's on their website. And that actually gave me a bit of a tool when
Right.
we went in and said, okay, they're, A, much smaller, B, they don't have the manpower, the firepower to really help you in that specific region of the world. So we double down on certain regions and obviously kind of cut back on others. So I don't see this as a tool for, the social quote unquote angle. I'm not looking for the yellow pages. I'm not looking for the yellow kind of, the dirty behind the scenes, ha ha ha, everyone's happy. And, it's kind of Facebook. No, I'm looking at it from a different perspective, if you will.
I spend more time on my competitors' websites than my own.
Sure.
Because I know what's on my website, what's changing, what's being added, what's being removed. So you spoke about competitors' websites. You spoke about their social media named LinkedIn. Not only what are they posting, who's joining, who's leaving, who are their executives, where they came from. What other tools do you use to paint that picture of who your competition is?
Not necessarily tools, but looking at external kind of information on their product. It could be on Reddit. It can be on subreddit groups. It can be on things like G2, things like Gartner Peer Insights, like Gartner, Voice of the Customer. So what are the customers saying? I mean, I care what the company is saying about themselves and how they position themselves in the market. What the analysts are saying, it's all interesting, but I want to understand, kind of the flip side of that. I want to understand what the customers are saying. And I was able to dig out a lot of dirty, again, quote unquote, things that actual customers said. And again, those are validated customers. You go into the Gartner website, you need to be a valid. So there's a vetting process for you to join, for you to, they read all the reviews, there are people post. It's not just, it's like a, an AWS marketplace type of thing. So you can't just post, incognito. You need to say who you are, what you do, what's your role, how much you paid for. So there's pre-qualification that they need to kind of go.
By the way, you can't even put in AI content. I've tried that once, and they say that we identify this as AI content. You have to write it yourself.
So we tried, quote unquote, to influence, that side with our customers, kind of saying, here's what we want you to say, here's what we expect you to say. And it didn't fly. It just didn't fly. It wouldn't go through the process, the screening process before the review went live. So that's a really very good, source of information. Again, they make it hard on us. If you're looking at a competitor, you can search it, but you now need to kind of go in one by one, copy paste. There isn't an automated way of doing this. I wish there was. I wish we could. I tried to download it, but then it kind of gives you a PDF, but then it kind of detracts some of the data. So it was a lot of manual effort.
Just like copy and pasting.
I did. Yeah. It's like a massive Excel sheet. But the downside is I wish I could do this, on an ongoing basis at scale and kind of feed everything into that superpower automation machine and kind of get the kind of feeds on the other side, kind of do this, update that, or even better, a salesperson doesn't have to kind of reach on Slack or on LinkedIn on, whatever source of communication they use and reach out to me and say, oh, where do I find the latest on XYZ? No, I want them to know that that file there or those files there across the various competitors are the latest and greatest always. They're always up to date. They're always there. The link doesn't change. It's, it's kind of monkey see, monkey do. Here's where it is. Here where the peanuts are. Go.
Right. Okay. So we spoke about social media. We spoke about website. We spoke about third party, analyst, right? G2 and peer insights. What else are we looking at?
So a lot of the data also comes from two additional sources. The first is we mentioned the analysts. I think they play kind of a double game, kind of that James Bond. They can be sort of that double agent. Oftentimes, if you're friendly enough with them, or if you pay them enough, kind of hate to say that, but that's sometimes abuse. You do get some information. Again, they're not going to spill the beans on everything, but you do get a sense of where the market is going, what specific vendors are looking to do, whether they're looking at, in M&As or kind of strategic corrections. So that's one way. But the other is the field. So rely on your own people. So it can be an SE, it can be a solution architect, it can be a salesperson or an account executive. It can be anyone that has, an SDR even. They sometimes get stuff or push stuff over, and then they get on a call with, on a first meeting kind of a discussion, and all of a sudden they find themselves in a shitstorm of, oh, but you said this, or they give me this, or they as in competitors. So a lot of that information needs to come from your own people. And that to me, I think is the hardest part, because I think that takes education and grunt and grind, and they need to know that you're there for them. But it's, it's a two-way street.
I think it's the hardest, but also most valuable. But let's break that down a little bit more, right? So I have a sellers and SEs. What do I do with that thing, right? Because you have anything from win-loss analysis to data in Salesforce, right? Have them fill things out. You have conversations, you have gone conversations. So can you break down that single pillar of, okay, like how do I get that information from the field?
So you mentioned, the three main avenues or channels to actually bring in that data. But even then, you rely on people's good intentions. And again, just between us, because no one else is listening, salespeople are lazy. Yep. If they lost a deal, they're just, they just do as little as they can to kind of say, oh, we lost because of a competitor. That's it. That's the best you're going to get. And when I look back at our data, at some point, it was like only 20% of the actual information was there. So even when you say, oh, you know what, we've conducted a win-loss analysis over the last 3 years, zilch. It either means that our industry is not very competitive, which we know isn't the case, because I know it's very competitive, highly competitive. A lot of vendors are either jumping on the wagon or, kind of via M&As and whatever. So although I do assume good intent always from our, from our AEs or sellers, that data is lacking. So it's one source of getting that data, but it's not the only one. You mentioned Gong. That's a super valuable tool. But again, you need to find yourself. And I do that driving either into the office or back from the office. I kind of download these specific calls and then I make myself listen to them. But then again, it's a long day, you miss things. And so a lot of it, I'm now looking to kind of automate it. So basically, dropping it into an AI, giving it the simple prompt of, okay, here's a conversation, or you're an agent and you're looking for, give me the 3 top things that specific vendor said, either about myself or the competitor. Give me a renewal date, if there is one. If you can't find one, assume, first of the month and the year if they mentioned it. And let's kind of go on from here. And over time, I did get a lot of really good information from Gone. Again, work in progress, right? But it is something that I need to build confidence before I actually go and share this with, with a greater team, and everyone has visibility. Mind you, we're over 400 employees. There's a lot of eyes, a lot of pressure when you go out and kind of push something out. It resonates. Excuse me. I mean, the effect is fairly large.
I agree with you that salespeople cannot be relied upon. They do, if you do put into Salesforce, like name the competitors, I think there is a place for that. And then,
and it's a mandatory field, by the way, right? But it hasn't always been the case.
Okay.
But yeah.
I mean, you could define what is in and isn't mandatory, but what you could do then is build like a dashboard or like based on that, and it's just raw data. There's no explanation there, but you could say, hey, I'm seeing that in APAC where like we're just getting killed by this and this competitor, or for small medium businesses this like, and you could, if you play around with it and create different dashboards, and you could see the trend over time,
Sure.
what competitors grow. So I really like that method as well.
So it helps. We've done that. It has given us, as you said, some level of success, but in order to kind of really move on to the next step, we need to get more data more often, better data, if you will, not just data. I really need that intelligence and not just kind of raw information. Oh, I heard this from XYZ. I don't need hearsay. I need, facts.
Do you guys do win-loss analysis?
We do. I do.
Okay.
But again, that depends on the, on the good intent from the seller.
Right.
On the wins, everyone's happy to, to kind of share them, to talk about them. They want to be on the pedestal. They want to be kind of spoken about. But if you lose, it becomes shady.
Right.
There's a lot of people involved, and they kind of want to stay hidden and not kind of, it wasn't my mistake. It wasn't me. It was this, that, the other. It was product. It was a missing feature. So it becomes a little muddled, if you will, but yes.
And it becomes a bitching session where they essentially are allowed to complain for.
It then becomes that, but then this isn't my intent.
Right.
I'm not a psychologist, even though I do have a couch in my office. It does tend to become that, where people kind of come in, close the door and say, okay, I need to talk to you because XYZ, we are missing this, we're missing that. How can you help me? And sometimes I feel like we're the ones, product marketing, that is kind of building the bridges between, product on the one hand and the field. Because they feel like that there's a lot of kind of tension. They want this, they have their own timelines, they have their own roadmaps, but it doesn't always kind of align with the realities of what the product can do, what the product was promised, to do or to have or to enable.
Right.
So yeah.
No, I'm a big believer on that especially here in Israel, that product marketing, we tend to be the kind of eyes and ears for the field. We kind of tend to be the most
field focused.
Exactly.
I agree. And that a lot of the requests, a lot of the requirements that do come in that are kind of outside of proper, PMM work are such. Yeah, help me with this. I need something more kind of, not just kind of your shallow competitive analysis. I need something more strategic. I need something, we're speaking to the CISO of this largest financial in France. Kind of, help me arm either myself or the team with something. And because we have that, just like you said, we have the relationship, we have the broad knowledge of the market, the competitive, kind of, and our own products. We sometimes, not always, but sometimes, we do a better job than the actual product managers, or more kind of internal looking, very
right.
Yeah.
I don't think it's better. I think it's complementing. We kind of both bring our own, right? I try to be the voice of the market in the product team and try to bring something unique to that conversation. But Asaf, I do want to go back. So we spoke about, I think, 5 pillars. We spoke about social media. We spoke about the website. We spoke about third-party review sites. We spoke about the analysts, and then we also spoke about the
field, or
the field, and we broke that up into a few. I have coming to mind 2 other more out of the box methods. I wonder if you have any. Investors. I think especially in smaller companies, investors sometimes have either they may have some of your competition in the portfolio, or they may know they kind of have a weird ear to different things and what are people talking. So that's one avenue. The other is resellers and partners, specifically from, I shouldn't say this, but developing countries where ethics are a little bit more shady, Turkish, where they'll give you like your competitor's price list. That happened to me before. They'll give you access to their to your competitor's demo environment. Again, everyone in their own like set of morals, but third party will be a little bit more open to things like that.
Yeah, so we do have kind of the occasional, kind of golden tip or golden nugget from, just like you mentioned, one of our investors. we've heard that they're either on the market for another round, they're either, kind of putting themselves for, for a possible acquisition. It very much depends. So we are getting that, but that's, to me, it's good information, but the question becomes, how do I use it? How do I now make this such that, I don't burn the source?
Right.
And, I want to keep that information coming, that information streaming in. So it needs to be, very kind of in the right occasion, across the right, whatever you want to call it. The other one, which we are just now tapping into something like that. I've done this before.
Okay.
So I see this as a bit of an unfair advantage, but I think everyone kind of takes advantage of this. So so why not? Investors. We do have a lot of, you obviously have your board of directors, and you have your, their peers. And so that data, it always feels like it's a super small community, especially here in Israel, but not only. So, he heard this and they told him that, and kind of, and word travels fast.
And that might be a broader conversation for our role in general. Investors became investors because they have a ton of experience. They know this field back, right, and forwards. Talking to them and learning from them. And very rarely have I seen investors who are not willing to help, who don't want to be they're always there to help. And
Unless there's a conflict of interest.
Right.
Which
happens. Which happens. So Asaf, I have all this data. There's a ton of it. How do I build that puzzle, right?
That's the $1 million question. And I think we're still trying to figure that out completely. So we do have a good mechanisms, I should say, across, getting the data. I have what I called kind of the tiger team. So for one specific competitor, we build a tiger team. We're meeting on a bi-monthly basis. And everyone, so the team is fairly large. It consists of 15 or 16 people, which is quite a lot of people. So not everyone comes to every meeting, but I try to kind of gather at least 3, 4, 5 people for the meeting. So it could be a combination of legal and RevOps and product managers and SAs, solution architects, and SEs,
Right.
and SDRs, and customer success, and anyone that, or everyone and anyone that has access to either post sale data across a specific vertical, across specific competitor, if you will. And we come in. I kind of lead the meeting. I have my own agenda, and we each so there's homework to be done before that, which everyone hates, but that's how we get better. So on the legal side, we just spotted, we have, by means of deception, we now have, the EULA of one of our competitors. We have the legal because, the customer was like kind of tiptoeing back and forth between us and them. We now have their, kind of their legal agreement. As I said, on the legal side, on the RevOps side, we look back historically at, win-loss analysis and gather this data. We went to a trade show and we made ourselves be someone else by, again, means of deception. And we went to their booth, we asked questions, we now have a better understanding. We have access to additional materials that we didn't have before, wink, wink. So there's a bunch of things that everyone brings in. And I, as kind of, obviously the call is recorded. I heavily use AI afterwards, and kind of, I build my own prompts. And, kind of, I would be lost without my, my best friend and colleague at work. She basically kind of, built all this infrastructure for us. And without it, it's kind of hours of sifting through data. And with it now, it's a little easier. It sometimes takes more than one iteration. So you kind of throw everything, all this data. There's like one master document. Everyone throws their data in. We don't always get to go through everything. Sometimes pick up, okay, here's what's interesting for today. Here's who actually joined the call, and let's kind of speak about this. For example, we're going on our sales kickoff in 3 weeks time. And I, as luck would have it, have an hour-long competitive analysis session. So that's exactly what we've done. So I said, okay, on a close loss and, win-loss analysis, give me everything that you have, because this is going to be shown. I need, ARR numbers. I need number of deals. I need geographical breakdown. I need, kind of pull all the stops. I need all this data, bring it in. And that now is used as the basis for the conversation. we speak to a solution architect who's based out of Singapore, but he plays, again, double agent because he is, he has his own company, and he does pen testing as a service.
Okay.
So he basically used one of our competitors' products in the past. So he was able to bring in a lot of really good information. So I'm going to bring him on stage and say, okay, how do we objection handle XYZ? So it's going to be, the type of Drew Carey, whose line is it anyway type thing. So imagine that. So I'm going to be calling them out. I'm going to have people, designated people in the crowd who are going to ask the question. That's going to be kind of the initial conversation starter. And he's going to have to kind of tell the story. Here's what I heard. Here's what I know. Here's how I would go. Instead of me, the SME kind of saying,
Right.
here's how I would go about this. Let the expert kind of objection handle. Let them answer a question that is really competitive in a way that they would actually, when speaking to a customer or prospect. So
But
that's,
by the way, you could sometimes especially in the small industries, you'll have employees who've worked
correct.
at other, right? Not only as like, hey, he sold their product, or he was a user of their product and now he's a user of our product, but actual sellers from other companies, and they'll, I'll find them very early on into their journey at the new company, and I'll ask them to present. I'll do a whole debrief, and people are very forthcoming. They're willing to share.
They are, especially in Israel. I can tell you that we had a couple of ex competitor working for them and now working for us. We had things going the other way, which is fine.
Yeah.
You can't hold people in. You can't make sure that they stay at their own will. But I think that when they do come in, they're, just like you said, they're very forthcoming in sharing. Again, there is no, there's no going around that data.
Yeah.
If they're not going to tell it to you now, they're going to tell it to you in in a month or in two. So I'd rather catch them, just like you said, early, when it's still fresh, when they still remember, when everything is kind of, oh, I know exactly what what that means. I know exactly what that does or what it doesn't, capability wise. So that's also a very good source of intel. Yeah, we have like new emails of new employees coming in, and there's always kind of, they work, oh, I worked that, or they did this, and I go like, okay, that.
But you spoke about something that I've never done before, and I really actually like and probably wouldn't look to replicate, is having that committee, bringing a team of experts, one or two people from each department, and have an hour-long meeting that we're going to talk about competitor X, and then have that conversation. Maybe when you build out a battle card, that community will review it.
They are.
So I never, I have I have done in the past is I had a PM per competitor. I gave each PM a competitor, and I would work with a single PM on a single competitor. But I never had, you're talking about 15, 16 people.
Correct.
I think that's really smart, because you're getting so many different perspectives and opinions, and everyone's part of the process in a way.
The thing is, I've come to the realization that I don't know what I don't know. So if I don't ask, if I don't speak to Ben, our RevOps guy in the US, I'm very unlikely to know what's going on there in terms of win-loss analysis. What is working? What isn't working? What are the numbers? You can look back at Salesforce, but then you need to be a Salesforce whiz. You need to be a Gong guru. You need to know all these tools and kind of know them back and forth. Instead of that, I said, I'll bring the SMEs from their respective regions, roles, responsibilities, and kind of bring everyone in. And then you get a much broader picture. When I initially offered this to the CMO and then the CEO, when I pitched the idea, he was like, okay, I get it, but show me the value. Show me what it's going to look like. Lo and behold, we had, at the end of last year, we had like an executive offsite where the CMO basically used the data that was gathered throughout those meetings and kind of presented that. And he came back to me, he gave me a big hug and said, hey, let's good is good. Let's continue doing that because ad works. That makes sense. It's the right approach. It's the right attitude. It gets a lot of people's attention. And I think people want to be heard.
Right.
At the end of the day, that's exactly why, and I'm not telling you something you don't know, people want to be on stage. If they have a good story, if they want to have a moment on stage, that's how you go about it. And I'm actually sending out the email today to those, chosen few, if you will, who are going to join me on stage to actually pitch, do your objection handling. I think well, you either like it or you don't. Some people want to shy away from the limelight and say, I don't want anything to do with this. I'll just bury myself under a rock and never to be seen again. Others are like, you can't just get off the stage. You've had your 5 minutes of fame and glory. Now, move on. So it very much depends.
Also, sellers, I feel sellers believe other sellers more than people outside, right? Especially if they're a good seller. Hey, there's whatever.
Making their numbers, that they're winning, that that's what good looks like. So you're saying, I want to latch myself to someone like this. I want to tell his story. I want to be him when I grow up.
Exactly. The other thing that you could do is also bring a customer who was evaluating two products and then chose yours over the other.
We tried that.
Okay.
So it's kind of mixed. It's very,
Right.
It depends on, how talkative he or she is. It depends on how technical. Sometimes they go way too technical, and on stage, on SKO, when you have, a very short window to get everyone's attention on that. If they go very deep, then you've kind of lost them, and that's it.
Right.
So
Okay. So Asaf, we gathered the information. We have everything we need. You said sellers are focused on selling. They're talking to customers. They don't have time to learn, to spend time. They want to get things quick, easy, precise. How do I take all of that and make it very clear, very precise for the seller, but then also for the sales engineer, sales architect, or whatever? How do you give them the tools they need to win against competition?
I think it needs to hit, a multitude of levels. And that's, I think, the difficult part, because if you make it too high level, SEs or, solution architects, solution engineers, or sales engineers are just gonna, okay, I know, I've known this since I was 3. It's old news. It doesn't tell me anything. So we need to hit the right balance. How I typically start my competitive analysis, competitive teardown, objection handling, planting landmines, all of those, and any of those is typically I started with, if you only have 5 minutes. That's how I started. So if I only have 5 minutes before I get on a call, before I jump into a POV or proof of value, proof of concept, whatever you want to call it, before I jump on a demo, here's what I need to remember. Here's the 5 things that I need to do. Here are the 5 kill shots, kill bullets, whatever you want to call them, that if there's 3 things to take out of this conversation, it's 1, 2, and 3.
Right.
That's how I go about this. And then if you want to go into the, into depth, it's it's there as well.
Right.
I kind of try to give them that kind of quick, just like you said, they're lazy. They're, they just want a snapshot. Okay, I get it, go. And then I'll kind of bluff my way around it. So we've had a lot of success with it, but that's just kind of, just like you said, it's craving.
It's for the seller. An SC and SA can't get by, I think, with 3 bullets. They're going to really, okay, when it comes to capabilities, how do we compare with on all of these elements? But a seller does, I think, needs to talk a lot more about the vision and where we're going and why our vision aligns better with wherever it is. Right.
Of the customer. So yeah, I agree. And it doesn't always, just like you said. So a seller may kind of look at this and say, okay, it's not my style. It's not how I tell it. What I try to do in those kind of, if you only have 5 minutes, give them specific examples. So for every win that we have, I obviously collect the data. I put it into a massive file that has, kind of the name of the customer, when the first, kind of the license, the size of the license they acquired, who's the seller. And then I reach out to them, get additional information, plug that in. And then when I go about putting this, if you only have 5 minutes, I mention the name of that customer. So that's used as a, as a use case, as a customer example. Because if they say, okay, you guys are, for example, you're safe by design, how do I go about saying the other way versus a competitor? If I'm planting a landmine, it's not enough to say, oh, you guys aren't safe enough, or you're not this or that. So an example from a customer and a quote really goes a long way. And that, through that storytelling, the sellers feel more at ease, whether it's their story or someone else's. If they feel empathy with the story, they can connect with it.
Right.
That's how.
So is this a slide? Is it a document? What does it look like?
It's a combination. So the if you only had 5 minutes, is the beginning of the planting landmines against X competitor. And then from there, it goes into kind of a, what are the landmines that you would...
It's a document.
It's a document.
Okay.
But there's also a slide or a slide deck, which kind of has, we've spoken of customer example, customer use cases. Here's the, here's the need. Here's what we kind of very generic.
Is it customer facing? Would a seller use that in a competitive situation?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Again, you need to get the approval from the customer to kind of have their logo, have their story told. We have those who are anonymized. We have a lot of customer testimonials on the website. That's also I use as, kind of sometimes they speak of something like CTEM or, any other 4-letter, 5-letter Gartner acronym, for example. You want to kind of capture that and kind of drop it in because I mentioned it makes sense. It tells a story. There's a good narrative. And at the end of the day, when you look at someone else and they say, listen, the what's in it for me is 1, 2, 3, and 4. And if you as the other person whom I'm pitching to can relate to that information, can relate to that message, I think it's, it's a winning story.
No, that makes sense. And so how do you proactively get the sellers who, as we mentioned, I don't think they're lazy. I just think hopefully they're busy with selling. That's what they're doing, right? They're not sitting, hopefully they're not sitting around. How do you communicate this to them? Or is it reactive, right? So they come to you, say, hey, I'm going against this competitor.
Combination.
Great, here's the document. Okay.
A lot of them kind of keep on going to the age-old question, where do I find this competitive analysis on X?
Oh, that's a number one question we get. Or no, it's not, it's anything. Where do I find a white paper about, and you're like, there's a resource center, you just put in whatever the topic is, and voila.
The name, and it's there.
And it's just, and the guy's been at the company for 5 years, and every month, and you do it, and then they also think you're the best thing. You're like, wow, he keeps on helping me.
It was there. I didn't know we had it. I know we had the most updated. You're right. So so you're relying on their good or bad memory, kind of that goldfish, 5 months. Yep, we never met. I don't think you've shared any document with me, since I joined, which is not true, obviously. But nonetheless, I think that it's a combination of reactive. So sometimes there's something that needs to be done. We had just last week, one of our biggest customers in Europe came to us and said, listen, we are French customer. He said, we are in the process of going through a kind of a platformization play. So there's a new CIO. I spoke to the CISO. He said, listen, here's the problem. We're not going against, but you guys are now kind of the new kid on the block, even though we've been a customer, longstanding customer of theirs, but they're now looking to kind of standardize across Palo Alto, CrowdStrike, and Microsoft. If your solution doesn't fall within any of those three, you're out of the game. So what he said, I need your help in justifying Pentera to my new CIO. Right. So we're like, okay, so we have competitive analysis against whatever, all three or one of those vendors, but it's a different mindset. You need to kind of shift gears and say, okay, that's a strategic conversation, and we need to arm him with things to say, how to position, and then it kind of turns into an ROI discussion. It turns into, the benefits of not just kind of, feature function type thing, about roadmap, about strategy, about kind of bigger things that aren't necessarily kind of the softer ones. So it very much depends. It depends on the need.
Right.
90% of it or 80% of it can be solved by here's the latest, or here's the resource hub, or here's the competitive hub, look for XYZ and you'll find it there. If it's not the latest, shame on me. I'll get to it whenever I get to it. But that's typically the case. The other ones, kind of the extremities, are the most challenging ones, which do require a bit more in-depth involvement. But I kind of like those more, if I have to be honest.
No, it took me a while to figure this out, that, look, there are always those deals that will win or lose on capabilities, right? I need blah, blah, blah into integration. You don't have that, you're out of the picture. And whatever. And that's fine. But I'm finding that more and more companies today, especially when it's the seller speaking and not the SC, they buy into the story, the vision, how does this fit into what I want, right? And how it will make me look to my managers and to my peers, and a lot of CISOs today are looking for the AI angle. How am I preparing myself for AI? How can I come to the board or wherever it is and say, hey, we've just put this in that is going to tackle the next generation of attacks. So I think part of our role, it's very easy to get that I'm sure you have this, we have this kind of the table of, check and X that we have, they don't have, we partially have, exactly. And that's needed. We need to have that, but we need a very clear story against the competition. Why we believe that in X amount, why we'll do better today, but also we're going to go on a journey with you. And I think both of those are important to give the full picture.
Yeah, and that's one thing when we spoke about the Tiger team that I mentioned before. one of the things that one of our solution architects said, and that's kind of an arm that comes in, kind of consider them like a professional services type thing, but they don't just do the kind of the post sales kind of onboarding. You have weekly, monthly, depending on the license that you purchase, kind of meetings with them. They go over the results with you. They kind of help you operationalize. They help you kind of go over the reports and say, okay, here's where you need to focus this week, next week, and the week after. For example, when one of the guys said, listen, let's kind of frame this as a white glove service. And we kind of said, you know what? That's a really cool way of saying what we offer as a competitive advantage, and everyone gets it. You don't need to go into the details. You don't need to kind of tell the story. Whereas the other vendors or the direct competitor that we were in, they may have, a chatbot on their website. They may have, kind of an SLA of, we'll get back to you within X whenever weeks or months or never. Whereas you have, a local person in your language, in your region, in your time zone, and you can, you have their number, you have their email. It's, it then becomes this kind of almost like a bear hugging you for, for the better or for the worse of here's where we kind of accompany you throughout the life cycle of the product, of how you go about using our solution.
And that's our role as product marketers and marketers in general is what story do you want to tell? Are we the fastest? Are we the most secure? Are we the best? Are we the most tailored to your needs, right? Well, what is that value? At the end of the day, especially in our world, yes, people buy into the vision, the story, and how it makes them feel, and not necessarily the set of capabilities.
Absolutely agree. And as you said, we're seeing this and we're likely to see this more and more with the consolidation of everything into kind of one platform, one vendor. You're kind of losing that personal touch. And I think people are still in need for that. You see that on the banking. I mean, look at my parents, and kind of 20, 30 years ago, you went to a bank, right? And you spoke to a real person. Now it's, you're lucky if you could get into your banking app without, two-factor authentication. I mean, I kind of, I become, the IT of my family. That's kind of, a side story. We all are. I completely agree. And I completely relate to that. Or it needs to be tailored in a way that really tells the story, not just for that specific vertical, not for that specific vendor, not for that specific competitor. It needs to tell a very kind of, I hate the word holistic, but, kind of comprehensive, kind of a wider story that encompasses all of your capabilities.
So before we finish up, I do want to double click a little bit more on communicating it, because I think that's half the battle. Like having a very clear story and a differentiated story and a whole competitive intel program is half the battle. The other half is communicating that. There are a few methodologies that I use. So there'll be like enablement sessions where it's just whatever. I have an enablement session every week, every other week, and I will take once every other week, once every third week, I will take a section of that and dedicate it to a specific competitor. Here's an update. Here's someone who had a really interesting competitive story. Have them tell the story. Hey, we just updated the battle card. This is what it looks like. Let's review it real quick. So I'll do a lot of that. I'll create a hub of all the competitive intelligence information. Something also, there'll always be that guy who's like, hey, where could I find? But everything is there. Everything is updated. If you do have the tools, and you'll have like a battle card inside the in Salesforce, the battle, like you put the battle card in the opportunity, which is pretty cool. Sales kickoff, you mentioned, I think is a extremely important time for us to be able to communicate that. And I think sellers are super interested in that.
Sure.
What I'm trying to think. The one of the out of the box things I did is I printed out the battle card on more heavy paper and sent it to all the sellers so they could have it on their desk. It's like very small. It's half a page, but both sides. And the idea was that you could put it on your desk, whatever. We had three main competitors, so there were three kind of kind of cardboard things, and the idea was you put it on your desk, you're on a call with a customer,
and it's right in front,
and you could just whip it out. So that's an out of the box idea that I'm.
So I'll start from from the last one because you mentioned it. We did print, I think it was on the back of last year's SKO. We printed kind of mouse pads, like massive ones, which basically had our messaging map on it. Yes, the kind of our top level messaging, and then kind of how you go down the messaging map, but it doesn't just go into, we do this or we're the best in that. It kind of goes into the actual product. So if you're looking to, to kind of detect or validate or test, so here's, here are the pieces of the puzzle. That's the the top all the way down. And it was a fairly large one. We sent it to all of our.
It's those bigger mouse.
Those bigger ones, yeah.
That's so cool.
Keyboard on
exactly
a mouse, and whatever you're doing, it's like what we have here. Everybody that site is is kind of I love so we double clicked on one prior. The question prior was on tools, so we have HighSpot for those who know what it is. It's basically kind of a centralized kind of asset learning management, which as a result kind of keeps the latest and greatest. So there's no need for pointing out the latest and _final 26 _3 V8. Yeah, exactly. None of that. That is the version there is always the latest version.
Right.
And you get automatic notifications from the system. We can set them up as such, basically to say, okay, you've passed your 2-3 week or month, since the last update. So it kind of keeps you diligent in, we need to go back and, so you kind of make sure that is always up to date. And when I joined Pentera, I was under the impression that enablement was a one-way street. You kind of set the call, you have the discussion with the sellers, the AEs, the SEs, the go-to-market people, you send them whatever documents, and you kind of forget this until the next iteration. What I found out is it does work, or it doesn't not work completely, but some people are either doing their training or workout of the day because they're US and whatever, it's a different time of day. They just woke up, they're just going to bed. It's either coffee or tea or combination thereof. People have their kind of day to day. So we made sure that per every enablement that we did, we're using MindTickle as a learning management system. Every new asset, every new enablement basically goes into, to the revenue management, revenue operations, and they build a course in MindTickle, which you are mandated as a salesperson to attend. And if you haven't, your boss knows about it. And if he doesn't, respond in X amount of weeks or days, his boss knows about it, and so on and so forth. So we put a system together. Again, it's not based on fear or, kind of cracking the whip, but we want to make sure that whatever, time, effort spent on us putting together the data, taking the time to, deliver and give you the data, give back and make sure that, you at least take the time to read it, review it, run through the assessment, answer some basic questions. Again, it's not to say that, we're looking to kind of, nitpicking, oh, you haven't, or you did, but it's more of kind of that personal responsibility that you have as a seller. We're putting you, we're kind of shifting the responsibility over to you. It's your responsibility. You want to do better. We've given you all the tools, Mr. Seller. Don't, you can't just kind of flip this on us and kind of say, oh no, I'm missing this and I'm missing that. Those things still happen, but I think kind of empowering them to have, to kind of take those quizzes and do those tests whenever, in their own time, really gives us that extra edge. And I think it really works. It actually paying dividends, by the way.
And look, it's our responsibility to create value. And I think if we're able to do that enough, then sellers are willing to come and do it. If we're just wasting their time and they're spending an hour and they learned one thing, maybe if you come and it's a 20-minute session and it's precise and it's to the point and it's going to help them win deals and make more money, then they're going to come back. And I think it's on us to either, and you know what, you only have 1 or 2 or 3 times to fail, because if you don't, like at some point they're just going to stop showing up, and you can mandate up till tomorrow. It's up to us. So yes, they have a responsibility. They're the face of the company. They need to can stay educated, but I think there is a lot of responsibility on us to be concise, to be to the point, to get rid of the fluff, to be uber focused.
Right.
And
I think the last thing I'll say is kind of leading by example. By the way, and just, and I'll end with this unless you want to keep on going.
Dude, I could go for we could probably do this for a very, very long time, but we have a day job.
End of last year, the CEO approached the AVP sales of the US team and said, listen, I want all the new AEs to undergo a mock sales session with myself and 2 or 3 SMEs. He actually took away from his time, end of year, mind you, Q4, probably, the busiest time of the year for anyone, let alone the CEO. Mind you, that got extended into, to Q1, into January. But I've spent probably 15 to 20 hours with him. And he did much more, actually. He did many more of these sessions where we brought in the new AEs, their manager, myself or another SME, and the CEO, and we had a role to play. He knew the kind of the role play, what was his part, what was our part, what was I portraying. I was the mock solution architect or security architect, and the CEO was the actual CEO. The scenario was simple. We met you guys, where we met the CEO at Black Hat last year. We gave him the pitch. He reached out. I accepted the meeting. Go, type of thing. And you lead by example. Once that starts from the top, it has to trickle down. And when sellers see this, initially when we spoke to them and we sent them the email saying, okay, here's what you expected. You're going to be graded. And, we gave them kind of a scorecard at the end, the things that, you did well, the things that you need to improve, kind of, and even kind of quoted stuff from their session. Obviously it was recorded. We used AI and, and a bunch of things, but they got their, quote unquote certification with a score from, 1 to 5. Let me tell you, I got a lot of Slack messages, that day, because people were like, I need to perform now, in front of the CEO. It's scary. Yeah, exactly. You kind of putting yourself in a situation where, and, just like I was in the first few seconds of this conversation, you're kind of, you're finding your momentum, you're getting
Rhythm, yeah.
groove. And people at the end of those sessions, we got so many thank you, kind of directly to the CEO, but also to myself and other people who were involved in the process. So it's not just, kind of if we go back to what we said about, your responsibility for knowing, it's your responsibility for up-leveling your skills. That's how you do it. That's how you become better. And, we're here to kind of help. We're not here to kind of say, okay, here, have this. We're here to kind of help you along the way.
Asaf, so much to think about, so many ideas to steal and share. Hopefully our listeners will as well. Before we go, I do want to thank our home for this podcast, Google for Startups. If you have a startup and looking for a place, I was walking around a little earlier and just seeing the people working. It's actually a really cool environment. Yeah, you could come and you'll get a ton of resources from Google. So if you have a startup, you should come check it out. I want to thank our producers for this show who left me hanging today. So I still hope this came out good. But Rotem, Atara, and Shachar, who help us and make us look good. And yeah, like, subscribe, and hopefully we'll see you in the next one.
Thank you very much.